Welcome back to the channel, guys. Now today we're going to do a quick analysis of Jimmy Chang's Gotway Master crash, okay? So first things first, the closer we get to the sun, the colder it gets in reality. Just an FYI. Number two, the fact that tech doubles in advancement doesn't really apply to the Master, to be honest. If we go by EUC upgrades, the 134 volt was achieved by cheating. Simply putting batteries in series doesn't equate to that logic of tech getting better. Gotway used a simple and safe method to achieve its goals of 134 volt, which could actually be a bad thing when you consider range and extremely hard riding. Here's why. So one, you lose the benefit of having batteries in parallel. The advantage of having batteries in parallel is that you increase the available runtime. For example, 2 batteries in parallel doubles your runtime, 3 batteries in parallel triple it, and so on and so on. Number 2, batteries in series without also adding the redundancy is backwards thinking, because once again, if we go by EUC upgrades assessment, it means that if one battery goes, the entire system fails. This is highly problematic for any type of ride. The batteries in series are highly efficient, however, and provide a higher voltage. This means that batteries in series can last a bit longer than batteries in parallel. We know that the primary components holding up any EUC is the electronics and the battery. Gotway appears to have compromised on the battery configuration, to their credit, for safety reasons. That's not forward thinking, that's just taking precaution, because you inevitably reduce the amount of runtime. Also, my high-speed MSP does around 50 miles per hour, albeit at the very edge of the safety margin, and starts the third level beeps around 43 miles per hour. The Master starts beeping around 44 miles per hour. That's about 1 mile per hour more than my high-speed MSP, which has been out for several years now. Not to mention, we still have the Monster, where we can achieve potentially higher speeds with its beefier batteries. Finally, if that statistic mattered at all, then it doesn't show in the specs for the Master, because we should be at around 48 to 50 miles per hour with the first beeps, and we are not, so I don't see the relevance of that quote. However, he is right saying EUC tech in general has doubled, and in some cases more than that where range is concerned. The increase in battery size of modern EUCs have made it possible to never need recharging for days, and in some cases that includes a bit of hard and fast riding. However, where EUCs have really shined is in the areas of accessories, as he mentioned, from pads to modular lights, spike pedals, various seating arrangements, apps. I mean, the list is really long where accessories is concerned. His friend Andrew mentioned the torque on the Master is noticeably much better than the KS20/22, but all Gotway enthusiasts such as myself out there pretty much know that this did not come as a surprise. Gotway is one of those companies that's so good that their flaws tend to constantly overshadow how good they really are. But when another company attempts to match their prowess in performance, the terrible attempts from said companies at that point tend to make Gotway really shine. So while it might have been a surprise to Jimmy and his buddy that the torque was amazing, this has always been true for Gotway machines, that when it comes to performance, almost in any category, whether it be range, speed, torque, acceleration, form factor, battery management, Gotway is absolutely the best. So credit to him for making that clear with absolutely no ambiguity. His friend also mentioned the suspension should be upgraded because it's a bit too bouncy for him. I'll say this though, he seems a little bit heavier than Jimmy Chang, so that could be a reason. I don't think Gotway has some type of chart to compare rider weights versus suspension settings, but now this is where wheels like the S18 and the KS22 absolutely shine. That's by far their biggest claim to fame. They are the suspension wheels, full progressive suspension that is. And with the King Song, there's no compromise. They own that. The only distinguishing factor between the Master suspension and the King Song KS20 and 22 or S18 suspension is that one is a true bred and the other just isn't. The Master will be perfect for city riders who want to experience a less than jarring ride at low to high speeds with some off-roading capabilities, where the KS22 is an overall all-around suspension wheel that can do both on-road and off-road and not skip a beat. Now, I would like him to explain what he means by that statement, quote, "This is a high maintenance suspension compared to the KS20. I just don't see that by all accounts via online reviewers who've had the wheel for a while. It appears the KS20 by nature having more moving parts, more parts to adjust, maintain, etc. should be the high maintenance one, but I could be wrong. The pads don't seem to do a good job of locking him in place, as do more customized aftermarket ones like the Clark pads, side pads, Grizzler pads, etc. But that's typical of pretty much any pads designed by the manufacturer. Hopefully one day they'll figure it out. Although I had a really good experience with the KS22 pad, so a lot of people didn't like it. I didn't see any issues with it. No major issues with it. The pedals on first glance appear massive and comfortable. So even though it was unfortunate that his foot came up when he was going down the dirt steps, the large pedals did their job. So Jimmy Chang, being a lot lighter than his buddy, gave a better review of the suspension performance from the Master. Once again, I'm confident that it's due mainly to the difference in weight of both riders. He also mentioned that the Master suspension is better than the Hero, but he gave no real details as to why he thought so. He did also mention the bolts used on the machine seemed very cheap, and I could attest to that because Gotway has that reputation. Hopefully they fix that in the production models. Now, he was spot on with the taillight being subpar and cheap. The seams are not fitted properly, and there doesn't seem to be any reinforcement for the plastic transparent piece of the taillight. He later proved that when he crashed unsuspectingly on a dirt surface. You can already imagine this won't fare well on much harder surface like asphalt, as later proven by a terrible crash. Despite this and some other issues they found, they touted the Master as the best wheel with suspension and torque. Now, seating is another strong point on the Master compared to the lackluster and less than practical design of the KS20/22. You can expect to have a similar experience on the Hero as well. Now, about crashing. The issue with him crashing is partly due to not applying any type of methods to his approach. Before, he highlighted a statement from somewhere that the Master was capable of doing speeds upwards of 60 miles per hour. With that said, if that was the only metric or source used to determine the wheel's capability, then we would see how that crash pretty much came about. It's important to note your sources and how reliable they are. A 60 mile per hour Master sounds great and tempting to try, but before you embark on that suspect journey, you need to answer a few questions. First, weight of the rider that reached that speed, battery percentage of the wheel at the time of testing. Not typically the case with most high-performance wheels from Gotway, but in this case, since there are various battery options, what type of battery was it equipped with? In my last QA video on the Alien Rides range test, I noted the two battery options. One with a 10 amp meant for mostly range, hence the small output and thus less power, and the other with 35 amp output, which means you will be able to sustain higher acceleration and even torquing at high speeds. From what I can tell from the limited view of the crash video and from his own testimony, the battery wasn't at full charge, which doesn't 100% mean that's the reason, but if you're riding a 10 amp wheel at high speeds and happen to either lean a little bit too much or torque it a little bit too much at high speeds near the minimum safety margin, then that could lead to a terrible outcome. In contrast, the same can be said if the wheel was equipped with the 35 amp battery, but it's less likely on paper to end in a similar result unless the battery was extremely low under load and coupled with rider weight plus any instance of over torquing or leaning at a high rate of speed on low battery. In short, if you pass the beeps threshold, then any type of hard torquing past that point can be a risky affair because the margin is extremely low. This is unless you know exactly what you're doing. In either case, I'm glad he's okay and lives to ride another day. The same can't totally be said about the wheel. However, he was still able to ride it around with apparently no issues. So it appears Gotway built an amazing machine with no significant protection. Hail to the aftermarket. So a little more on Andrew's lean. Andrew's lean actually wasn't that bad. His legs up to his shoulders were about a little bit less than perpendicular to the ground, with only his head overarching when he was accelerating forward. So the form definitely wasn't the issue because it was very good form, although not what I would consider top form because both legs were leaning in the same forward direction. I won't get into the details of how to safely lean. Check out my other videos for that. But regardless of that, it appears when he reached the limit, whatever that limit was, at the battery that he had remaining, gave him zero chance to pull back in case of a pedal dip. Also, in case of the pedal dip, that form made it almost impossible to react to the dip just before cutout because at that point he would have overshot. Also, it didn't seem like he was using any type of monitoring apps, which is an absolute must if you're doing top speed runs. What I'm happy about is that he didn't blame the wheel once, not once. So big points for that. He knew the risks, pushed the wheel, took the spill, and did not give Gotway the bill. That was supposed to be funny, and you're supposed to be laughing out loud at this point. So once again, he, like Alien Ride, said the beep started around 43 to 44 miles per hour, which is not impressive at all for a wheel that seems to be, the fastest on the market. I'm really wary of this spec actually, and hopefully I'll have the chance to scrutinize it a bit more. I don't understand how a wheel of this caliber still beeps at the same to similar speeds as my high-speed MSP and possibly the EXN. One thing I can say is, in my experience, if you experience a cutout going straight, I highly recommend you try your hardest to fall as forward as possible. Okay, sideways falling can be very destructive because you're pretty much interrupting the flow of the fall or kinetic energy. Example, if you're going in the direction of a punch, you're less likely to get knocked out versus the opposite direction of the punch. So the fender, front light mount, tail light, front part of the foam, the mudguard, metal crack, on the side of the machine did not fare too well for the master. But overall, the wheel was still extremely operational, which is very impressive. I mean, sure, you'll look bad riding back home, but at least you will get home. So to be clear, he said the battery was around 60% when he tried the speed run. Truth is, 60% battery is not so bad to attempt a speed run, but again, I'm curious to know what type of battery that was, if it was a 10 amp output or a 35 amp output, and is the battery being in series a potential reason as well. So the good news is that the beeps are audible enough to be heard through the helmet that he was wearing, and that looked like a pretty beefy helmet. So massive upgrade there. I disagreed with the last part about the beeps, although subjectively. He said he was able to ride the beeps on Kingsong, but wasn't able to ride it on the Master. I don't think it's a matter of not being able to ride the beeps, as opposed to him possibly leaning too much past the threshold. Riding the beeps is very different than pushing past the beeps. Remember, Kingsong and InMotion have pedal tilt warning, which is a physical way of letting you know not to push any further. At that point, pushing past the tilt is asking for trouble. I give him a C- for that specific assessment about the beep. But overall, this was a great review and fantastic video. Very unfortunate this happened, although I had my doubts on whether this was planned or not. Jimmy just seemed a little bit too calm for my taste, but maybe not. So finally, my overall take is finding the top speed should never be a mystery, but methodical and planned, since we don't have any type of solid feature from Gotway that allows us to reach it safely. On the bright side, we have amazing monitoring apps such as EUC World, which I use, and I'm sure there are tons of other ones out there. Thanks guys for watching. Till next time, happy riding.